L'honorable député de...
The honourable member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when the Liberal government announced that Canada would be acceding at last to the Arms Trade Treaty, I was really very happy. I congratulated the government, the NDP. We're very pleased because for years we'd been calling on Canada to take part in this important treaty which could save lives, which deals with important issues like gender discrimination and the whole issue of the arms trade, which is a cause of great instability in the world. But it's more or less a broken promise from the Liberals. And why is that? Well, because they say we're going to accede to the Arms Trade Treaty, but Bill C-47, the bill we have before us, respects neither the letter nor the spirit of the treaty.
The current bill was described by an expert to whom I was speaking recently as making a mockery of the Arms Trade Treaty. So even though we at the NDP wanted, and we've pushed for years for Canada to accede to the Arms Trade Treaty, we cannot support that bill because that bill doesn't respect the treaty. And we do respect the treaty. It doesn't respect either the letter or the spirit of the treaty. En fait, ce projet de loi...
In fact, this bill is a bit like a sieve. The holes are bigger, actually, than what's actually still there. The first gaping hole, this is not just a big hole, it's a gaping hole. All of our exports to the U.S. are not covered by this bill.
Into account, Madam Speaker, that over 50% of our arms exports are to the U.S. And when I say over 50%, I don't mean 51 or 52. I mean it could be 55, 60%, 65%, because in fact, we don't even know. Officials tell us it's over 50%, but we don't even know what's the actual percentage because those exports are not tracked, they're not reported on. And when in committee, I asked one of my Liberal colleagues, I was saying that we should at least report on our arms export to the U.S. One of my Liberal colleagues answered, well, it's difficult to report on something we don't track. Well, that's the problem. It should be tracked. And especially right now, as President Trump is lowering the bar for export to countries like Nigeria, so the risk that arms produced or components produced in Canada find their ways to a range of countries where we wouldn't want to see those arms is even greater. On se souvient du dossier sur les...
Remember the Philippines matter when it came out in the media that helicopters were being sold to the Filipino army. And the Philippines is a country with a president who has previously boasted about throwing someone out of a helicopter and that he would do it again. So when this came out, everyone said, oh, we have to put a stop to this. The Filipino authorities themselves were a bit insulted. The idea was dropped. But when you hear reports about the company in question, what they're planning to do, it's really not that complicated to send the helicopter disassembled to the U.S., then assemble it there and send it to the Philippines. That's a good way of getting around the act. And that's problematic in practical terms, because with that exemption, we're losing control over half of our arms trade, And as I said, it respects neither the spirit nor the letter of the treaty, because the treaty says it has to apply from wall to wall. You can't just choose to exempt exports to one place and not to another. That's not the way the treaty is supposed to work. That's not how treaties normally work, and that's really not how this treaty works in specific. I'd like to come back to the matter of the sale of helicopters to the Philippines. Some people might wonder how that even happened. How was it possible that the minister could have approved an export permit for those helicopters to the Filipino army and the Filipino government? Well, the problem is that they didn't need an export permit because it was a deal that had been cut between the two defense departments. It was arranged through the Canadian company. They brokered the deal. So that's just a gaping hole. Exports, which are very sensitive, very delicate in nature, they didn't even require a permit from the minister. They required no approval. And those helicopters could have been used to commit human rights abuses. So that's a gaping hole in our management of Canadian exports. What does C-47 do to solve the problem, Madam Speaker? You'll never guess. Nothing, absolutely nothing.
Cover the activities of the Department of National Defense or the Canadian Commercial Corporation. So this huge loophole, and we don't even know all the things that went through that loophole, will still be wide open. So export to the U.S., not reported on, not covered by the treaty. DND, CCC, not covered by the treaty. I mean, what's left is kind of shrinking all the time. So, you know what should be done with this bill, Madam Speaker? This bill should be sent to the shredder because it's basically flawed. And I'm not the only one to say it. All the experts are saying it. So, but of course, the Liberal government won't listen to that. So, and they'll ram through this bill, even though it can weaken the actual treaty. I always wonder, where's Canada back in the world? That's not being back to the world stage for me. So that would be the ideal solution. I know they won't do it, so at least we are going to try to improve it a little bit through this amendment that close another element, a crucial element of the Arms Trade Treaty that is not covered in the current bill. That is, make sure that if new information, if an export license has been given and new information comes to light, that then, you know, the minister has to reassess the export permits. And, you know, I'd hope that my colleagues in front would support that. It's part of the treaty. It should be in the bill. But we know that in the case of the Saudi Arabia, the minister refused to do so. So here I rest my case, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague for her intervention, and I thank her for her work in committee. I do find it unfortunate now that she is expressing her opposition to Canada's accession to the ATT. It was a principled stance that the NDP once took, that Canada should be a leader in regulating the sale of conventional arms around the world. I'm not surprised that once again they've abandoned their principled position in favor for partisan opposition in their stance. I do want to correct the record, though, because this bill, C-47, will see the entirety of the Government of Canada accede to the ATT. All of the organizations and departments in which she referenced will be party to ATT standards. It will allow Canada to play a leadership role in regulating and regulating the sale of conventional arms worldwide, why is the NDP once again proposing to abandon its principled position that will help Canada play a leadership role in the world?
The Honourable Député Laurier.
Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. Perhaps he wasn't there at the beginning of my remarks, because I think I was pretty clear. I think I was quite clear that we agree in acceding to the treaty. But it has to be done properly. Not simply state that we're going to be a part of that treaty. We actually have to respect the treaty. So I absolutely agree with it. But I'm against this bill that is simply makes a mockery of the treaty and doesn't respect the treaty.
Questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for taking the stand that she did and presenting this on behalf of our party. Madam Speaker, we have a propensity in this Liberal government of saying one thing and doing another. So they say we're back internationally, and so they say we're acceding to the Arms Trade Treaty, like they say that they will put the UNDRIP into Canadian law, and they drag their heels. So wouldn't it be nice if, in fact, the government, through you, Madam Speaker, to my colleague, wouldn't it be nice if they actually really genuinely acceded to the treaty and we did set an example for the world in the treatment and the sale of arms?
The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I would like to truly thank my colleague who works so hard on disarmament issues, for example. This is a very important issue for the NDP, and my colleague does extraordinary work on nuclear disarmament as well. And I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to rise today in this House to underscore the extraordinary work that my colleague does in this area. And I think she really hit on the heart of the issue. And unfortunately, we see this on many files. The government says one thing, makes lovely speeches, and I have to say that in terms of foreign affairs, I agree with much that they say, but I end up being in complete disagreement with what they do, because between what they say and what they do, there's a huge gap. They often say one thing, and they do the opposite, and we've seen this. We see this not only in foreign affairs, we see this in other areas. For example, electoral reform and climate change. So they do one thing and do nothing. For example, the protocol, the tortured protocol, we've heard nothing. And so I really think that they have to practice what they preach, Madam Speaker. Questions and comments?
Orleans? Ottawa. Ottawa West Nepean. That's Monday morning.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to thank my colleague for all the work that she did in the committee on the Arms Trade Treaty, but I'd like to ask her, we know that once this bill is passed, the Arms Trade Treaty will be legally binding to Canada, both in Canadian law and in international law. So I'm actually very surprised to hear that now she's suggesting that we not ratify, not pass this bill. And in fact, when we went to the United States, we spoke with the Office of the Regional Security and Arms Transfers in the State Department, who said that the American rules in many ways are even stronger than Canadian rules, including on brokering controls and end user agreements. So if she could please explain why now, after all this...
I'll give her an opportunity to answer because we've run out of time.
The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. It looks like my Liberal colleagues are having a problem understanding the difference between supporting the idea of acceding to the treaty and supporting this weak bill.
Of the Arms Trade Treaty. Et j'aimerais dire à ma collègue...
And I would like to say this to my colleague. I rarely speak to my experience as a diplomat, but I have to say that I never would have expected an American diplomat to say to us that our own rules are weak. So we ourselves have to look at the reality that we have no control over. And we have to look at the fact that the Trump administration is even further weakening their export controls.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.